Maybe your company has an ERG or wants to start one. How do you get the most out of these ERGs for your own personal development and also for the business bottom line? Hi, I'm Diana Brunell, a career strategist guiding ambitious Latinas to help them meet their career goals. And today, I'm excited to talk to Hady Mendez. She is an ERG coach and CEO of Boldly Speaking. And we talk about how to engage with your employer, how to collaborate with colleagues and clients on this, and how to foster a sense of belonging and reach your company goals all at the same time. Let's go talk to Hady. Hi, Hady. Thank you for being here.
Hola. Hi, Diana. Good to see you again.
It's good to see you, and I'm excited to talk about how to get the most from our ERG, or sometimes they're now called BRGs. And when we think of ERGs, a lot of us saw them rise in 2020, but ERGs have been around since the 70s. If you think about women in corporate America who were forming their own informal networks. So tell us about the different types of ERGs that you have seen and that you have worked with over the last few years.
Yes, it's very interesting. You're right. That is around the time. I think it was like the late 60s, early 70s when the first ERG started. And it started with like a really big company. I forget which one it was, but it was like General Electric or like, IBM, something like that. They definitely have been around for a while. Many of them were known as affinity groups early on. So that, there was just like people hanging out together. And then I think over time, they've definitely evolved. And I think right now, like ERGs are all about especially because they are BRGs, they're all about alignment with the business. So it's like, it's gone all the way from maybe a safe space, even though we didn't know to call it that then, all the way to how do we align with the business? How do we help achieve business goals? And then everything in between. I would say my very first ERG was something we called the diversity committee at the first place where I worked. And it was
of course, and everyone else did too, by the way.
It was like a catch-all for if you're not a white male, you could come and hang out in here. And it wasn't that many of us, unfortunately. It was maybe 10 or 20 of us, but we did have this white male partner, associate partner, because I was working at a consulting company. And he was a big ally, and he was there to champion us. And it was a safe space for us to come and talk about things that we thought were important and how he could advocate for us. And a lot of the focus, I would say early on, was recruiting type thing. It was a lot of how do we get more representation? So let's recruit people. And then another ERG that I belonged to a long time ago was around community service. All we did was how do we show up in the community, and most of the time representing the company. So we did the things for March of Dimes or Cancer Walk or, food drive or things like that. I actually, that was one that really spoke to me in my heart. And it was made up of lots of different people too. It was really very diverse group of people, because if you think about it, the common thread was you wanting to serve. So it wasn't really identity based in any other way. So we had a really diverse group of people in that particular affinity group. I haven't seen a lot of those lately, but what I have seen lately that I think are very different. So besides the women and race-based ones, and probably LGBTQ plus ones, which I think are kind of very standard. Some of the more interesting ones, I belong to a sober one. So I belong to a sober ERG. And that I thought was a really interesting one. And it was there were people that were recovering. I am not someone who is recovering, but I am someone who for health reasons chooses to be sober. And so I kind of was alongside some of these people who were recovering, but we would just talk about how do we create more space for soberness at work? A lot of work stuff is happy hours.
Right. The happy hour environment. Yeah.
And it's we're going to have a celebration. It's the 1 year anniversary for our startup. We're going to everybody's getting drunk tonight. And it's well, can we offer other options for the rest of us? Because we don't really want to do that. So that was a really cool one.
I just wanted to jump on your point about other ERGs that aren't just race or gender or ethnicity based. There's one out here for a nonprofit around the corner that does caregivers. Yep. People in the workplace who are caring for someone. And I think back during the pandemic and some of the surveys we saw, a lot of people were worried about the parents who were juggling so much, but it
Yep.
turned out that people without children were just as stressed out because they didn't have the children to distract them.
Mm.
So people at different phases of their life, and in this case the caregivers, have different distractions and different concerns and stressors, even though they don't have children at home. So I thought that was another good example.
That was a good one. I would have loved that one. My parents are both deceased now, but there was a time in my career where I was actively taking care of both of them.
Yeah.
And I feel like, boy, it would have been so helpful to like have resources for like attorneys. I ended up doing like power of attorney for them and like
Mhm.
their wills and
Mhm.
things like that. Like it would have been so nice to have like resources around that because
Mhm.
I was navigating that, like those were uncharted waters for me
Yeah.
as someone who was taking care of my parents. And I just like, as a kind of a first gen person, I didn't really have a lot to work with. I didn't know, and I didn't know a lot of people who knew anything about it. So I had to kind of
Mhm.
navigate that on my own. But that would have been it would have been nice to have some resources around it back then. But I'm glad it exists today because my understanding is that it can be, quite a resource, not just like people like supporting each other, but like
Mhm.
sharing things. And I feel like
Mhm.
that's the nice beauty of it is like, here's where you can get help with this, or here's a good resource for that. And I think
Mhm.
that is really that can be quite powerful for people who are taking care of others.
Well, let's talk about some of the outcomes that we hope for from these ERGs, right? Whether it is a sense of belonging and how that leads to employee engagement, but then some of the other more business aligned, like you say, outcomes for career mobility or leadership development. So, talk through some of the goals or outcomes that some of these groups are shooting for.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you. I work with a lot of ERGs, and a lot of them are not shooting for much more than, checking off. Like we had the cultural month celebration, and we spent all our money. But obviously, there are companies that have DEI goals, and to the degree that they have DEI goals, I think that is the North Star for the employee resource groups. So, but it comes from like that Office of Equality or the DEI office or DEI leader, Chief Diversity Officer, someone at that company has to say, these are our goals around recruiting, retention, representation, whatever it might be, engagement, or like the sense of belonging. We want to like have, be at this score or whatever, like, how we have those NPS scores for customers.
Oh,
We
yeah.
want to have like scores for employees. So I do feel like the DEI goals are by far that North Star. But in addition, once you know that like you want to, let's say recruiting is a really big one for your company, and you decide that you're going to partner with recruiting, then you need to know what those specifically what that department or that function or that business line is trying to achieve so that you can understand how to best show up for them. And it might be that you attend a job like a career fair, job fair type of thing, as someone from that particular community or identity group. So that might be nice. Like let's say your company is going to go do an event with Latinas in tech, then
Yeah.
bring me along. I can be a good like a good face representation to show like, hey, here's I can tell my story about how I've navigated the company. But also, sometimes it can mean you're part of a panel. Sometimes it can mean lots of companies have partnerships with many different organizations. I know when I worked at Slack, we had a partnership with Power to Fly, and I got an opportunity to talk in one of those panels. And sometimes, sometimes the panels or the opportunities, the job fairs, the conferences might be like in my case, I identify as Latina, and there might be Latina conferences, so to speak, or Hispanic serving organizations that we partner with. And those are obvious choices that you would send someone like me or someone like you to attend those events. But sometimes like the partnerships that we have are not exclusively with one particular identity, and in those cases we still should strive to have a pretty diverse panel. So that's
Mhm.
like that's a priority. I would say that's a very important thing, and that's a way that ERGs can really support those objectives. Like if we want to make sure that we're always showing how diverse and inclusive we are, then we need to make sure that we're tapping into our ERGs to do that. And that's just like one thing. I just said recruiting. That
Yeah.
could be the same thing for like we're trying to get more underrepresented talent into leadership. And how do we do that? And what are the ways, we're going to partner with the talent and development team. We're going to partner with a different part of the organization for that. Maybe there's a team that's focused on sponsorship programs, and we want to make sure that ERG leaders get a chance to participate in these programs early on as members of those communities. So there could just be like an infinite amount of ways that I think different business lines and the ERGs can partner together. But the idea is to be intentional. And I don't think it's like, throw a lot of things and see what sticks to the wall. But like say this year, we're going to partner with like 2 or 3 business groups, and we're really going to figure out how this partnership could really be mutually beneficial. And then next year we can add more business lines to our objectives.
And I think that's a really good point, to start small, to start where you are, because if you start to try and do too much, then you're not doing enough for one group, and you don't want to fail. No one wants these groups to fail, because then you get the backlash that, oh, see, this wasn't worth the time or money, that we shouldn't be doing these things. So I think it's this cycle that you have increased employee engagement. If you've got someone who feels a sense of belonging, they feel valued and appreciated, then there's more engagement, which hopefully then leads to career mobility, which means that you can bring other people up, the business does well, and that cycle continues. So can you speak to maybe 1 or 2 clients that you've worked with, or maybe even your own experience of a company that really got it right, and what was different about that group that made it successful for everyone, not just the employees, but for the company?
Yeah, I'll start off by saying that I think a lot of this is trial and error, and even within one company, because a lot of it is a function, I think, of the leader. So like even at one company, there could be ERGs that are thriving and ERGs that are like surviving. And it's a lot of it is a function of who's leading the ERG, what that community is experiencing in that point in time. If you think back to, different even global events or national events that impact different communities, some ERGs really struggle during different times, or some of them really come together and they're like thriving because they're really showing up for each other. So I do feel like there are external factors. A lot of it is like who's leading that ERG, and then and how empowered they are. Like if there's someone that's like micromanaging me at every turn, then I'm not going to be a really super effective leader, and that ERG might suffer. So I just wanted to point all of that out, because it is hard to say like who's doing it great. Like I've seen, occasionally, I'll tell you, there was one ERG at a company where I worked. So it wasn't all of the ERGs, man, but there was one ERG that was knocking it out of the ballpark, and it happened to be the Black ERG. They were doing phenomenal work, and it was on the heels of the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter movement. So they got a little momentum during that time, but they kept that momentum up. Like 2 years later, they were still doing great. So that was just like, that was the tip of the iceberg. But they had like so many allies that were showing up all the time, which I feel is that's a good sign. When allies show up, that means your content is really good. That means people feel welcome. That means people feel safe. That means it's okay to like be curious and like come in. That means your members are maybe probably like inviting other people along. Because, when you want to have a closed meeting, it's because the community is suffering. But when you're ready to open it up, it's because like there's a lot of goodness there. And I do feel like they just did all the things right. But they had an excellent leadership team. That like the team was amazing. Mm-hmm. They had a great sponsor. So an executive sponsor, whoever is assigned to work with that ERG or volunteers to work with that ERG, their role is really important. And if they really show up and they advocate for that ERG, and they're like supporting that ERG very visibly, it signals to other people like, hey, show up. I'm showing up. I'm giving my time. I'm signaling to you that this is important. So it's not just, listen to what I say. It's like, watch what I do. I'm here. So I do feel like, you got to get the executive sponsor in order. You got to have a good executive team. You got to have membership that's like activated, and you activate them by like acknowledging them, valuing them, appreciating them, shouting them out, giving them things to do, taking their ideas. So like they were checking all the boxes, and they were they were like what everybody want. All the ERGs were like, we want to be like that. It takes a lot of work. It's like, they made it look easy, but like it wasn't easy. It needed, a lot of things needed to be aligned in order to have the impact they were having.
Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to give you the name of the company. It was Xerox that is credited with
Okay.
having.
Yeah. I knew it was one of those old school companies.
Yeah. They had the National Black Employee Caucus initiated,
There
I
you
think
go.
around the time of 1970. But you
Yeah.
mentioned sponsors. Let's talk a little bit about that. And the sponsor is not necessarily someone who represents that affinity group. It is someone outside. It's someone in leadership. Tell us a little bit about that person.
Well, ideally, it should be someone from the community. So a women's ERG should have a senior woman running, as an executive sponsor. An LGBTQ plus ERG should have someone from that community, a queer person in leadership that is, serves as their executive sponsor. What happens is there's not enough people from these marginal communities in leadership roles, so then it ends up being like lots of times like a white man doing, serving as an executive sponsor for like a Black or Latinx or other ERG. So we don't always have representation from our communities, and that's that's sad and not good and needs to change. So that's one data point. I think it does offer us an opportunity to have someone who's not from the community to the extent that they're willing to learn and listen and lean in. There's a wonderful opportunity for them to learn a lot from the experience and say, I don't know anything about what it's like to walk in your shoes. I don't know anything about what it's like to be queer in corporate. I don't know. And I don't know what it's like for people to like refer to you by the wrong pronoun or misname you or mislabel you or make assumptions about you or put you in a box or hold bias against you. Tell me what it's like and tell me what are the priorities. Tell me what we need to fix. Tell me what's going to make it better for you. So they need to learn and then they need to advocate. Those are the two things: learn and then go and advocate on behalf of the ERG. And some executive sponsors are amazing and some people are just very busy. They have a lot of competing priorities and the work doesn't get done in the way that it should.
Yeah.
That's the reality.
Let's talk a little bit about allies, because when ERGs really hit the scene 4 or 5 years ago in an explosive way, right? There was some people who were taken aback, who were not part of the community. So if you had, for instance, I saw a white woman be very offended that there were going to be employee affinity groups around certain race and ethnicities. And we tried to have the conversation about, this is the safe space. This is a space for them, that we're not trying to exclude you because these people have felt excluded, for millennia. So can you walk us through that type of conversation, which can be a little tough?
Yeah, I think this actually goes to answer a little bit about a question you asked before that I don't think I answered fully. And that's that who benefits when there's ERGs. So there's a lot of stakeholders. Obviously, the members are one stakeholder and they're a very critical stakeholder because it's their safe space. Sometimes it's the only safe space they have at the company. So it's very critical for those ERGs to exist for those members. And the ERG leaders, they benefit from being in those leadership roles because it could really lead to more opportunities for them at an organization. It could lead to some advancement. They're going to get exposure. They're going to, be hooking up with an executive sponsor. Maybe someone notices something in them. Maybe like as they develop, their leadership skills over a year or two, people are like, wow, like Hady might be a good team leader. Maybe we should make her team leader. Maybe she should lead a department. Maybe she should be, leading this team over here. So clearly the members and the ERG leaders benefit, but the other people who benefit are the organization as a whole is benefits. The organization as a whole benefits because now there's people that are feeling a better sense of belonging. So they are like, maybe I don't feel safe everywhere. And, the organization's working on that. But until that's solved for, and that's, truly, that this place is truly a place that, has this sense of inclusion and belonging for everyone. Right now, we have some safe spaces that we can definitely account for. So I feel like the organization has that upside. I feel like, the different business lines benefit because if the ERGs now partnering and saying, I'm going to give you a unique perspective. I'm going to tell you something you don't know about the Latinx community. I'm going to tell you something you don't know about being queer and a veteran, or queer and disabled, or Latina and being an Afro-Latina, whatever it is. Like, there's intersectionalities, there's distinct communities. I'm going to tell you something you don't know, and I'm going to enlighten you. I'm going to give you a different perspective. I'm going to help you to be a better leader. I think I would argue that everybody stands to benefit, because now the teams are better teams if you're open. But that obviously there needs to be a culture of openness, curiosity, learning, vulnerability, because you got to want this too. And, it's funny. I had a conversation just today with a customer who will remain nameless. And they're like, we need you to help us, get our ERGs excited. I'm like, I can't do that in 1 hour. I wish I could wave my magic wand, but like, I'm going to start it. You have to continue it. Like, what are you going to be doing? What are you committing to? Because you need to commit to this work too. Like, this is not a one and done thing. These are not silver bullets. These are not things that it's just like, okay, we're going to throw a bunch of money at you and everything is going to be fixed. We have to be working on improving the experience of every single employee. We have to make every single employee feel appreciated and valued and celebrated and recognized. And we have to be doing this all the time. And, you hear this complaint. I'm going to say it because it's Hispanic Heritage Month. A lot of us feel like you only give a crap about us for 30 days out of the year. And the rest of the time, nobody talks to us. Nobody cares about us. Nobody asks our opinion. Nobody wants to know about the Hispanic experience. It's just irrelevant. And like, we're dismissed. And so like, that's our beef. Like, it's like, could you care about us the other, 11 months out of the year? Because we're still here and we're still not having an optimum experience. So if you listen, I think if there's good, fertile ground, there's an opportunity for everybody to grow from the experience. Because really, we're all on our own DEI journey. And some of us have lived experience that kind of forces us to talk about these things much more, because we're advocating for ourselves. But there's other people who have privilege, and they're not as impacted by some of the microaggressions and the bias and other, negative circumstances. It doesn't really affect them in the same way. But if they really want good teams, if they want productive teams, if they want teams that are excited and that are people that are doing their best work, then they got to create those work environments where people, want to work and feel valued and are happy to be there, type thing.
Yeah, I hope people are watching you on the YouTube version of this podcast right now too, because you're beaming when you talk about it this way. There's a real smile that's coming through. And I want to touch on, though, individuality, because I have also seen how some people, because of whatever is their experiences, they don't want to connect at that level. I'm thinking of a Hispanic woman that I knew when there was Latino ERG going on. She didn't want to be a part of it. And, I said to the team, like, this is her choice when she's ready. If she's ever ready, maybe there's too much bubbling up for her, or maybe that's just not how she wants to wade through her corporate life. I'm wondering if you've seen that as well.
I have, not a lot, I have. And I feel like as someone who's been around for a long time, I have like over 30-year career. I wasn't always this way. I wasn't always wearing my Latina flag on my head, on my face, and being like, yeah, I'm Latina. And like,
didn't always have the hoops.
No, I mean, I feel like there were definitely times where I played it more safe. And I was like, I'm not bringing, if you don't bring it up, I'm not bringing it up. We're not talking about it. They'll just kind of, but you and I both have privilege in that maybe we can get away with not talking about it. Some people, it's like, if you talk about it or not, people are already putting you in a box.
Yeah.
And some white passing people, I don't know if you identify that way. I don't exactly identify that way, but I do feel like sometimes that can be a little ambiguous in terms of people are not sure where I am, where I belong.
Yeah, I used to in my young 20s for sure.
Yeah. So I feel like there's a privilege in not being able to talk about it and like covering and just being like, I hope you don't say anything. And I remember sitting in meetings and being like, God, please, especially if it was like a dinner or something where we were like getting into more personal things and they're like, what do you do? Or like, where are you from? Or like, what's your story, Hady? And I was like, oh my God, I don't want to talk about this.
Yeah.
Because it's not always safe to talk about it, because I have experienced a great deal of microaggressions and stereotypes once people knew that I was Latina, The things that people said and you know, the way that I was treated was not good. And so to the best of my ability, I tried to just not make it a thing. And then I would say, you know, over those 30 years, that has changed. And now I'm like, I feel much safer being able to own it. And I'm very proud of it. I've always been proud of it, but I was scared to talk about it. And I was scared to talk about it because of experiences that I had. And I know that there are people that are even older than me that changed their names or like, you know, just did code switching and never came back. So it was like they went to the other side and they were like, I just need to assimilate in order to be here. And, you know, those are choices that everyone has to make. And, you know, you said it yourself, this person in the year 2024, I feel like we should all feel safe coming out, but that might not be true. You know, I've worked in big companies, maybe in a smaller company, that's not true. Or maybe in a team, in a particular team, if there's someone in a leadership position that doesn't make people feel safe, then maybe it isn't safe to come out. And, you know, like people cover, because when people cover, it's because usually they feel unsafe. And so the best thing a leader can do is create that psychological safety, create those safe spaces where people can come and be their full authentic selves, whatever that is. And I think ERGs are usually safe places to be that, you know, to come and be yourself and ask questions and be like, this is my experience. Does this sound familiar to anybody? Because that's the fear that we're like, am I the only one? Or is like, am I going crazy? Or is like everyone feeling this way? And everybody's like, no, it's not you. I remember I'll give you an example. I remember I worked at a company and it was like best place to work. It kept winning this award that it was the best place to work. And I remember going into a Latinx ERG meeting and saying, a best place to work for who? Because it doesn't feel that way for me. And everybody was like, that part. Everyone agreed with me. They were like, you're right. It's not a best place to work for us. And we collectively like really did feel that way. And so, I feel like people may choose not to be part of it, but I have always felt that ERGs saved my life, that they changed the game for me. They gave me places where I could ask questions, where I could meet people, where I could have connection, where I could have like this community. So I will always choose an ERG if I have a chance, if I have that opportunity.
And if you do have a good experience, then that is something that you talk about at that company. And then other people will think highly of that corporation. And then maybe that company can become a choice employer because the word is out, because there's everything that they put in the job description about how great we are to work for. But then you got to pull someone aside and say, what's it really like?
And the truth is that you could have a great ERG and have a horrible experience as in your daytime job. That's definitely
no guarantee. It's not a fix all to everything.
It doesn't always translate. Yeah, like you could definitely still be challenged in your day job. I definitely have had that experience. I spent a lot of time in sales. Sales is not really a Latinx space, so a lot of white men in that space, a lot of white women, and you know, I belong to the ERG, and I felt really valued and appreciated there. And I was like, these are my people. And then I would go back to my day job, and I was like, these people are all different from me, and I'm always the only Latina wherever I turn. And some people around here really appreciate that and value my opinion, and some people don't. And so, you know, it's not always going to translate to a great experience, overall experience, but at least, you know, hey, at least you have a safe space. Some people don't even have that. So it's a good place to start. But ideally, it should translate. It should be like, we have safe spaces and, you know, safe spaces from an ERG perspective. And how do we continue to that should permeate throughout the organization and the culture. That's the idea.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about starting, right? Let's say someone wants to start an ERG at their company. Where do they even begin? Like, what's a good roadmap for them?
Yeah, I actually started an ERG about 10 years ago at a company where I worked. And my first step was connecting with like the Office of DEI. It wasn't quite that formalized, but it was like someone was in charge of diversity and inclusion. And I said, hey, you know, I noticed you don't have a Latinx ERG. And they're like, yeah, we don't really have anyone that wants to lead it. And like, at least from that perspective, I give them credit because they knew that it needed to come from the people, from the community. It was not something that HR could lead. So I said, oh, I want to do it. And they said, knock yourself out. And I was like, do you have a framework? But they didn't have a framework. They're like, go talk to the other ERG leaders. So I talked to other ERG leaders, and I was able to, little by little, some of the first things I did was come up with a name, like what were we going to call ourselves.
Oh yeah.
Then we had like a little logo, so we had to come up with a logo for ourselves, and we used like all the colors from all the flags, which was really nice, and we co-created that, which was nice. And the name too, the name we co-created, we took votes, people submitted ideas, so a lot of it was like, it was all community based. That's how I like to work. I know other people do it different, but that's how I did it, so people could really feel like they were invested. And then we had leaders that we picked from the different like offices and regions throughout the world, and we're like, okay, now we have our London hub, we have our New York hub, our California hub, our Texas hub, whatever, Florida. And then we had our hubs. And then we used to get the leadership team together and talk about like, hey, Hispanic Heritage Month is coming. What do we want to do as a group? And then what do we want to do locally? And so we had like something that we did that was like company wide. And then we did initiatives that were local to our individual hubs. So that was, we had like kind of a wheel and spoke model. So we did some stuff globally and then some stuff locally that were more in person.
Yeah. Yeah. And did they give you any budget, or did they at least, there's two things, there's budget and then there's the time. Like, are they saying it's okay? I know you have a 40, let's face it, 50-hour work week, but we know that you're going to do a quarterly meeting, a monthly meeting, and you're going to spend work time. This isn't after hours, right? This is work time on some of these gatherings or conversations. Did you get that type of green light as well?
Yeah, no, I didn't. It was not that formal at the time in this place. So I didn't get a budget. They basically were like, when you need money, let us know. And they actually, to their credit, gave me money every time I asked for it. Of course, I was prudent about like asking. So it's not like I was like, you know, asking for stuff all the time, but I was like, hey, I think it'd be cool if we had like empanadas at the office, or we gave out paletas on this, you know, on such and such a day, or we take the whole team out. Like we took the team out to like, and we had we went to this Venezuelan restaurant. It was so good. And we just had like a little team building at the Venezuelan spot. And it was like, happy Hispanic Heritage Month. And, you know, the Venezuelan guy on the team told people what to order. They're like, oh, order this. And we're going to order, I think they're called patacones. I don't know. It's like these like fried things. And it was kind of cool. Like I even learned from that experience because I'm not Venezuelan, I'm Puerto Rican. So like, I knew I liked the food, but I didn't have all the like the 411. So it was like, he gave us like a tour of the food and it was really fun. And we took pictures and it was a nice team building. So I will say they were true to their word. They're like, if you need money, let us know and you'll get it. So that was nice. And they did follow through with that. Eventually they did it differently, but that was how they did it at that point because it was so new. The other thing is, no, they did not give me any time. I had to do my day job. And then pretty much after hours, I would do this stuff off the side of my desk. And it got to the point where at one point, my manager really had no idea what I was doing. Like, he's like, what is it that you do with that group? Like, what the hell are you doing? You know,
thank God he asked. Thank goodness he asked.
Yeah. And so I was like, hey, so here's what I'm, you know, he was like, wow, like you're the leader. I'm like, hell yeah, I'm the leader. I'm the global lead, you know, show me some love. So I feel like that also, I think, impacted how he saw me too. Cause he was like, wow, like you're leading the whole team. And I'm like, yeah. And, you know, we meet every month and we're doing this and we're like making decisions together. And I like, because I'm a very collaborative leader. So I like co-creating stuff. I don't like, you know, dictating. I'm like, here's some things I'm thinking about. What do y'all think? What's the best idea? And so I think he saw me a little bit differently from that experience. So that was a really good outcome.
Yeah. And I think that is a key takeaway, to make sure that you are in conversation with your boss or whatever division director exists. That way they know that there's interest in this, and they might think, okay, well, this is just Hady and one or two coworkers. No, it is 30 people. No, it is us in California and New York City and all of us around the globe getting together. So I think that dialogue is so key. So how do you also coach people on how to use this ERG experience as a leadership training tool, so that way they can get the exposure and use it as a skill set?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. And it is one of the principal things that I seek to do, but it is not something that many people are doing. And that's that, you know, oftentimes, so just sort of backing up a little bit, people who volunteer to be ERG leaders are not typically senior people. They're usually like below director level. I would say like a manager level is probably where they sit most often. So they're not entry level, but they're not quite directors either. They're kind of in the middle. And these people, that's a lot where people like us, like Latinx people, especially Latinas, get stuck. They don't get to the next level. So this is
Mm-hmm.
really critical, if I think just for our community alone, but it's not just our community that deals with this
Yeah.
issue. There's a lot of communities that, like, this is where people get stuck and don't get to the next level. So I do feel like it's an opportunity to build your skill set, talk about your impact, develop good relationships with your executive sponsor, leverage any opportunity you have to meet senior leaders, to get your name out there, to talk about the things you're doing, to talk about your impact. When you partner with other business lines, like, develop real partnerships. Like, it's like, I'm going to partner with recruiting. I want the recruiting people, like, let's build a real partnership. They should know who I am. They should, and I always used to say, like, whatever you need, anything you need for the Latinx community, come to me first. I'm happy to help you. Like, I want to be that subject matter expert for you. But obviously, I'm more than that. And so you could and should be talking about other things that you do in the company. So sometimes I feel like we get pigeonholed, and it's like, Hady is the Latinx ERG. She's the Latina person. She's the, the Latinx cheerleader. And it's like,
Mm-hmm.
girl, I'm also this other thing. Cause,
Yeah.
I was a senior principal customer success manager. I was managing the biggest customer that I had at the company where I worked at that time. And I was doing a lot of really good work during the day, my day job. And so,
Mm-hmm.
did I bring in aspects of the ERG work into I did. I tried to, like, my worlds were colliding, because I was like, hey, I think some of the stuff that we're doing could apply here, and we could, create a better work environment for everybody. So I did bring some of the stuff I was learning, but I feel even that is an opportunity. Like, make sure you're not put in a little box, because people, and it's not even like, I'm not even going to blame anybody for putting people in boxes. It's an easy way to just see the world, but it's not always a just or fair way to see the world. Like, I am more than an ERG leader. I am also an individual contributor or a manager or whatever it is that I do during the day. And sometimes, I can bring the two things together, and then,
Yeah.
wow, like, I can be somebody pretty special in this organization if you give me the opportunity, if you create that opportunity for me.
Yeah, that's why it's important that these things start to become part of our work and part of our plans. That way it's not just an aside, something that we do.
And part of your resume, and part of your
Yeah.
elevator pitch, and
Yeah.
part of the conversations with your manager during one-on-one time, and part of your leadership development. And if you talk about, like, oh, I remember one team I worked with, they were like, we used to have quarterly, like, QBRs for ourselves, and we used to have to say, what did we want for the next quarter? And one of my goals was, like, I want to be intersectionality chair for the women's ERG. They're like, what does that have to do with your day job? It's like, well, seemingly nothing, but, like, that is a goal that I have, because I want to be a leader in this community, and I want to meet more people, and I want to influence more people, and I want to see more Latina representation in our women's ERGs, which we know oftentimes don't have a lot of representation from the communities of color. So that was an important thing. And, maybe my manager appreciated it, maybe not so much, but it was my job to make sure that they were understanding why, that these were some of my goals were around ERG and DEI work. And by
Mhm.
the way, once it got more trendy, I was like, everyone was like, what should we do? What should be our DEI goal, Hady? And I'm like,
Hady, Hady,
yeah,
Hady.
yeah, exactly. Then all of a sudden I was a great resource. But up until that point, people were like, what is she talking about?
Yeah. But to your boss or whoever said, how is this part of your day job? I would argue that this type of work is part of the day job. And it's not about the warm and fuzzy, just about diversity and belonging, which I hesitate to use the word just, but I want to say that it is part, if done right, it can be part of the business outcomes. Because again, it is that snowball effect. Because if you are more engaged, Hady, you have a safe space, you talk to people, you network, then you can contribute at the highest level. And therefore, the company is getting the most out of you. And one of the things that I actually just talked about last week is employee retention, because turnover is so expensive. And as managers, you and I know, it sucks to go out and try to hire new people when you'd rather just invest a little bit more in keeping the great team that you have. So if this work is integrated and people do feel a little bit more engaged, that, maybe it's not 100% employee
It's
engagement
how
for
you
me.
keep, it's how you retain your top talent,
Yeah,
period.
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And you give them opportunities.
Yeah. And I was going to say, I remember I was in a customer facing role for a lot of my career. And this is kind of a touchy subject, to talk to about DEI with customers is not something that I ever like did by design. Like, we were focused on, partnership goals and, upselling and service and making sure things were on point. So I never did it during our meetings, but I will, I often connected with my customers online. And then if I posted something, an article or something interesting or a conference I was going to go to, all my customers saw my, the work that I was doing in DEI. And many of them unsolicited by me would say, I see what you're doing. And that's great. And a lot of them were not people of color, or, they were not people that identified with the work that I was doing. Like, they didn't identify with any of those communities. Oftentimes it was like a white male, and it was like, I love what you're doing around DEI. Like, that's amazing. Like, do you have more resources? Or I'm kind of curious about that. I love the article you shared, or whatever. And that was like a very unintentional outcome that happened, but it adds to the value that you bring to your customers. So, that, and I have seen since then, companies that I've worked for have their ERGs be part of customer conferences and, host happy hours or host events or do things, because customers like this stuff. Like this, we all work in places where we want to feel more valued and appreciated, and or we like supporting that notion. There's a lot of people here that are like, I want to be an active ally. I believe this. I understand the privilege I have. I want to use it for good. It should give me ways to do that. So I feel like it was an unintended consequence for me, but it's, companies see where if you do it, like if you're doing it, I guess, intentionally, it can also be something you bring into those customer facing spaces.
Yeah. And that adds to the company reputation. And that's what we're talking about too, about being a good employer, about a place they want to hire from or go to work for, or hire you as, the customer salesperson. And, your clients, they want to connect with other companies that are like-minded. So having that exposure, I think, from a client and the sales perspective can also be extremely helpful. So I think you and I could go on all day. But for the sake of this opportunity for this podcast, what are some final thoughts or anything else that you as an ERG coach want people to walk away with today?
I would just say that, ERGs can really be a lifeline for some employees. Don't underestimate how important they are, because they really are the lifeline for some people. It's where, for me personally, when I'm new to a company, that's my safest space. And that's where I get a lot of these unanswered questions answered. So I'm like, where do I go? What do I do? How does this happen? Like, it could be the silliest thing, but that is where I feel the safest to ask questions. So don't underestimate their value. They are a lifeline, obviously, for members and the ERG leaders, the opportunities they offer leaders, but they can be game changing for the culture too, and for the business. And so you just, on a holistic level, if you look at it holistically, ERGs they have a lot of return on investment. So support them, give them money, give them the support they need, make sure you're guiding them and directing them, and kind of continuing to push them along the continuum. Like, where the salsa lessons are nice, but we got to get past that into some really, good ways that these ERGs are being leveraged and utilized by the company, in order to really, get us as communities in front of customers, in front of the technology, in front of the products, or whatever the case might be. And so I love being an advocate for ERGs and ERG members.
Excellent. Well, you're a good example of how they can be so helpful, from a client standpoint and sales to employee engagement and sense of belonging. So, Hady, where can people find you?
I'm always on LinkedIn, so definitely there. I'm Hady Mendez. Maybe you'll provide a link, Diana?
I will, most certainly,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, good. So I think that's the best place, because that's where a lot of the conversation and resources are. And then I would say my website, bodyspeakingllc.com, is, I share a lot of resources there as well. And you could also learn more about the products and services that I offer. Maybe, there's something there that your company can benefit from.
I will link to both of those. And it's funny that you mentioned Power to Fly, because I've also done some speaking with Power to Fly. And just today, they posted something about employee satisfaction, or employees getting, people getting jobs from Power to Fly. So nice plug for them too. I'm sure they appreciate that.
Awesome.
Okay, my friend. Well, we'll see you real soon.
Okay, ciao, Diana. Thanks
Thank you.
for the
Take
opportunity.
Care.
Okay, cuídate.
Thank you for listening. For more, visit cornerofficelatinas.com, where we give you the framework, inspiration, and support you need to reach and thrive in the corner office. We have some free downloads on the website, where you can also sign up for our e-news, so we can keep you posted on workshops and events coming up that you will not want to miss. That's cornerofficelatinas.com. See you next week.